In the 1994 midterm elections, after a young, inexperienced Democratic president mounted an unpopular year-long health care crusade, Republicans took control of both chambers of Congress for the first time in 40 years, thereby reducing Bill Clinton to the status of a minor editor of Republican governance for the next 6 years of his presidency. The Republicans who came to power in that election were disciplined and unified, enforcing spending cuts, which combined with an earlier Clinton tax increase led to a $1 trillion surplus at the end of the 20th century. A chief enforcer of that Republican Party discipline was a former exterminator from Texas, the majority whip of the House of Representatives, Tom DeLay. Republican spending discipline collapsed with the inauguration of a Republican president in 2001, and on his way to becoming majority leader, Tom DeLay found himself in some bad company, most notably the craziest and most corrupt lobbyist of the 21st century, Jack Abramoff, now a convicted felon. Tom DeLay resigned from the House in 2006 while under a federal investigation of his involvement with Jack Abramoff and after being indicted in Texas on charges of conspiring to use illegal corporate contributions in the 2002 state elections. The Justice Department eventually dropped that investigation without bringing charges against Tom DeLay, but beginning Monday, he stands trial in Texas for money laundering and conspiracy. And yes, he is among the distinguished alumni of Dancing with the Stars. Joining me now from Austin, Texas, former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay. Mr. DeLay, can you explain from your position on the sidelines what you see as the rise of the Tea Party and what seems to be its merger with the Republican Party?
Well, Lawrence, good to see you, too. Actually, this reminds me a lot of what happened in 1980, about the time I got involved in politics. I was scared to death. I was angry at the Carter administration. I wanted to get involved, and I got involved. Little did I know I'd end up Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, but I was amongst a lot of just average Americans that got involved in their politics, supported Ronald Reagan, supported the Republicans, and went in and took over the Republican Party in 1980. So this isn't much different than that. It has more energy because I think the comparison of Jimmy Carter and Obama are very stark differences. Obama is so much more liberal and has done so much more harm to this country than Jimmy Carter ever dreamed about. It has created even more energy and just average Americans getting involved in the political process. And they took over the Republican Party.
By the way, I'm sorry for rushing into the questions. I did want to welcome you to this show, Tom. I'm very grateful for you doing it, but I'm so eager to get to this, having you here, that I'm just rushing into these questions. But let's keep going. The establishment Republican Party, it seemed to me, was reluctant to join forces with the Tea Party at first, but your old Texas Republican rival, Dick Armey, seemed to jump in early and bring Republicans and Tea Partiers together. Where would they be now if Dick Armey hadn't brokered, as from where I'm sitting, brokered that union between the Tea Party and the Republican Party?
Oh, I think Dick Armey just saw a parade and jumped in front of it. It would. I don't think he did anything to energize the Tea Party movement more than the people themselves. They were going along quite well before Dick Armey showed up. He did help in training them and guiding them and advising them. But the Tea Party movement, they didn't want any former politicians. They didn't want any Republicans. They were a movement unto themselves, and they grew like pouring gasoline on a fire. Every time President Obama would open his mouth, it probably increased the size of the Tea Party by thousands, and especially when they passed the health care reform, that had more to do with energizing the American people than anything else.
I want to read you something that Richard Viguerie, longtime Republican activist, said in the New York Times recently. He said, "We're all on the same page until the polls close November 2nd. Then a massive, almost historic battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party begins." Who do you think is going to win that battle?
They've already won it. Richard Viguerie is behind the times. We've just been through a whole party-building process, the primaries, going into the general election, energizing people to come work for Republicans, people voting for Republicans, people getting involved in their precinct conventions, their state conventions. They're not, and so all of that work has already been done. And if you look at the party leaders now, they come from the Tea Party movement. They come from people that have not been involved in politics before. That's all been done. That's what elections are about, building a party. So Richard Viguerie is way behind the times.
Now, as you know, both parties are polling very unfavorably in the polls. And so we have Florida Senate candidate Marco Rubio distancing himself from the Republican Party. Let's listen to how he did that in this week's debate.
You know, I'm not sure there's a part we disagree with or not disagree with, because my public policy isn't based on the Republican platform. It's based on the things that I believe in. It's the things that I stand for.
Dick, do you think that was a smart move in that campaign at that point to just kind of push the Republican Party aside and try to go straight to the voter?
Well, I don't know. He is trying to attract independents, and he's trying to attract Democrats to vote for him. I probably wouldn't have said it that way. It kind of pours cold water on the Republicans that are in Florida, but they're solidly behind him, and this is not the time, and certainly the day after the election is not the time to start inter-party rivalries and positioning. What's going to happen, and I've talked to a lot of Tea Party people, what's going to happen the day after the election, they're going to get a hold of those newly elected members of the House and the Senate, and they're going to have a talk to them, and they're going to talk about what they want to see happen in the next year or two, and that's what at least the leaders I've been talking to that might be classified the establishment, they have heard what the people have said in this election. And they intend to do everything that they can, knowing that they have a second chance to accomplish the things that the Americans are demanding.
Now, one of the animating forces of the Tea Party has been what they consider, many of them, out-of-control government spending. And it is not going to surprise you to hear that Dick Armey blames you for part of the Republican downfall, part of the Republican loss of control on spending. In an interview with the Texas Tribune in August, when asked if the Bush years were where the Republican Party went astray, he said the Republican Congress had the more or less goofy earmark strategy that resulted in this awfully ugly explosion of earmarks that was a short-sighted political strategy contrived primarily by Tom DeLay. How do you plead on that one?
Not guilty.
Okay.
My last year as majority leader, 2005, we actually reformed every entitlement program in the federal government, saved $40 billion. We actually cut spending for the first time since Ronald Reagan, a real cut in non-defense spending. We did a lot of things to rein in spending. In fact, you know, when we took over in 1995, all federal spending was over 21% of the GDP. Within 2 years, it went down to 18%, and it didn't get back to 21% till the Democrats took over in 2006. So, and Dick Armey was part of all of that until I replaced him as majority leader. And Dick Armey was never able to reform every entitlement program and actually cut discretionary spending. So I don't know what he's talking about.
Tom DeLay, before you go, I have to ask you, in your long career, what is your biggest regret? Is it hanging out with Jack Abramoff or doing Dancing with the Stars?
Well, I didn't hang out with Jack Abramoff. He was a lobbyist just like any other lobbyist that I dealt with. And a lot of them didn't go to prison. But no, my biggest regret is we didn't start redesigning the government quicker, as I started it in 2004 and really did it in 2005 and wanted to do more along the line of what the Tea Party people are talking about. They're not talking about cutting spending like Dick Armey's talking about. They're talking about fundamentally limiting the size of government and downsizing government. And if those Washington, D.C. people in there don't get that message, they're going to be in real big trouble come election 2012.
Tom DeLay, the best dancer among former House Majority Leaders. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.